Okay, good morning, class. We are going to look today at doing just the distance. How far is it from one point to another point in the coordinate plane? So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need my distance formula. Distance is equal to the square root of the difference between my x coordinates plus the difference between my y coordinates. Now, these are little subscripts, and they are there just to let me distinguish between an x from one point and an x from another point. So they're really not playing any part in my formula other than telling me that I've got two x's. One comes from one point, one will come from a second point. Okay. Now then, with this, after I get done with my difference or my subtraction of my x coordinates, then I'm going to take that answer and I'm going to square it. And we'll multiply it by itself. And I'm going to do the same thing with the y's. After I take the difference between those y values, then I'm going to take and square that answer. So really what I want to do with my distance formula is to follow the order of operations kind of. Okay. Your square root will be the very last thing that I do. Okay. I only use this formula with points in the coordinate plane. If I am given 2 points in that coordinate plane, the x, y's, then I can use the distance formula to tell you how long it is. Distance means length. Kind of in geometry, it's a nice way to remember it. Distance is equal to your length. How long is it? Okay, so let's go down and look at an example. I want to find the distance between these 2 points, -1, -6, 7, 8. And this time it says for me to round to the nearest tenth if needed. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and mark my x's. So here's 1x and my first point. There's my second x, that's 7 in my second point. Then I have those y's. Okay. A lot of times we'll mark them to make sure I do put the right 2 points together. You do not want to put an x coordinate with a y coordinate, and you do not take them both from the same point. Okay, so this would be like my x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. Okay, so I'm going to take my distance, being the square root of the difference between my x's plus squared plus the difference between my y's squared. The next thing I'm going to do is substitute. I am going to substitute in correctly to the x's and correctly to the y's. Okay, so I'm going to go up here and I've got my x sub 2 right here. I'm going to replace that with a 7 minus. Then I'm going to go find my x sub 1. That's that -1. So I'm going to replace that with that -1. And it's still going to be squared. Plus, I'm going to do the same thing for y's. I'm going to substitute in. So I'm going to go up here. I've got my y2 right here. And that is going to be replaced with my 8. Then I've got my y1, which is right here. I'm going to replace that with a -6. And then when I get finished, I'm going to square that answer. Now, here what happens when you subtract off a negative? Notice when I put that -1 in, I did not drop a negative sign. That -1 had to go in for that x sub 1. Okay, so when you're subtracting off a negative, that's actually going to create a addition. A negative times a negative is a positive. The same thing over here with my y's. In this case, they're both going to change to a positive because this negative times a negative makes a positive. Now I'm going to do my math inside my parentheses. So I'm going to take 7 plus 1 is 8. And I want to square it. Notice I left it inside those parentheses. 8 plus 6 is 14. And I'm going to square that. My next step is going to be the squaring. So 8 squared is 8 times 8, which is 64, plus 14 squared is going to be 196. So my distance is going to be the square root of my 196 plus that 64, which is going to be 260. So now then I'm going to take the square root of my 260, and it comes out, let's see if you can see this, I'm thinking, to that 16.124. So it is not a perfect square root. Okay, so now that I need to round to the nearest tenth. Rounding to the nearest tenth is to 1 decimal place. So we're going to come over to our 1 right here. This is the number I want to round, either rounding up or leaving it the same. So I'm going to look at the 2 right after that. If you are bigger than 5, and 2's not, if it was happen to be bigger than 5, I could go up. But the number right past my 1 is a 2. My 2 will not allow me to change that 1. So my distance is going to be approximately 16.1. Okay, so let's go back. I wrote the formula. I substitute in. Okay, then I'm going to basically kind of simplify. Then I'm going to square. Then I'm going to add. And then I'm going to take the square root. That's basically the kind of the simple steps that I go through to be able to find those things. Okay, so let's do one more. Again, I'll kind of mark my X's. That's always the first point, first part of your point. I will mark the Y's. That's the second one. And I will go ahead and label X1, Y1, X2, Y2. Okay. They're asking for a length, so I'm going to take that square root, the difference between the x's squared, plus the difference between the y's squared. I'm going to substitute in. So my x sub 2 is right here, and I have that labeled as 3, minus an x sub 1. X sub 1 I have labeled as a 6 squared, plus your y's. Y sub 2 is labeled as a negative 7, minus a y1, which is that negative 1. And then when I get done with that, I will square. Okay, so when I look here, I'm subtracting off that negative again. So that's going to make it into a positive. So my distance is going to be the square root. Let's do a little simplifying. 3 minus 6 is a negative 3 squared. And notice again, I left it inside parentheses. When you square this 3, you have to take that negative sign with it. It's not just squaring the 3 and leaving the negative sign alone. You've got to take that negative sign with you. Negative 7 plus 1 is going to give me a negative 6 squared. So my distance will be the square root. A negative 3 times a negative 3 is a positive 9, plus a negative 6 times a negative 6 is a positive 36. So my distance is going to be a 9 plus a 36, which is a 45. So then I'm going to take the square root of my 45. And again, kind of looking at my calculator, I want to round to the nearest 10, so I want to decide if my 7 stays or if my 7 is going to go up. So I'll look at the number right after it, 0. 0 is not bigger than 5, so the 7 will have to stay. So my answer is going to be approximately 6.7. Okay, now that's if you're given 2 points. If I'm not given 2 points, I'm given a line, a little segment in a coordinate plane, then the only other difference that I would have to do would be to get my own ordered pairs. So I would write my first ordered pair. So maybe for this point, so I'm going to come over 1, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. And then I would go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this would be a negative 5, comma 5. Then I get my second ordered pair for, say, this point. So I go back to the origin, 1, 2, 3, 4, up 1. So 4, comma 1. And again, I'll kind of mark these. There is the X's right there, that first one. Here is my Y's, the second part. I will go label X1, Y1, X2, Y2. I'll write my formula. X sub 2 minus X sub 1 squared plus Y sub 2 minus Y sub 1 squared. So my distance is going to be X sub 2. So I go up here and find where I've labeled. I'm going to replace that with that 4 minus X sub 1. X sub 1 I'm going to replace with that negative 5. And we'll square that in just a moment. Plus Y2 is 1. I want to replace that minus a Y1, which is 5. And I want to square that. So this is going to subtract off a negative. That's a negative times a negative turns to a positive. So this becomes 4 plus 5, which is 9 squared. It's going to become 9 squared. 1 minus 5 is a negative 4. And again, put that negative inside those parentheses. So my distance is going to be the square root of 81 plus negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16. So I've got 81 plus a positive 16 is going to be that square root of that 97. And then I want to do the square root of 97. So if you're looking at this, I get 9.84. So you're going to look at that 4. He's less than 5, so I cannot change that 8. So my answer would become 9.8 approximately. Okay? And that is using your distance formula to be able to find a length of something. How long is it? But I only use this when I am looking at ordered pairs in the coordinate plane. If it's asking me the length of something and giving me other things, then I have other ways that I will handle that.